Welcome back for a second edition of Falcons Today, because so many of you on our first video all about Justin Fields' potential trade said we want more. So you know what? Let's run through some Falcons Combine news and notes, because Atlanta has already conducted a handful of interviews at one specific position. Now, I do think it's worth noting to look at the history books, because for those of you that have been watching the channel a long time, you know I love my history. And last year, the Falcons had a combine interview with Bijan Robinson, who they selected. The year before that, they had a combine interview with Drake London, who they selected. So it's not a guarantee that whoever you have an interview with, you are bound to draft one of them. But these are definitely names worth keeping an eye on, starting to do some of your own research on. Now, one interesting little tidbit I want to get to before we jump into the interview list. Ian Rappaport put out a list of teams that will be conducting an interview with the LSU quarterback, Jaden Daniels. The teams include the Bears, Commanders, Vikings, Jets, Giants, Patriots, Raiders, Seahawks, and Saints. But no Falcons. Man, that makes you wonder. Even a team like the Jets, the Saints, the Seahawks that aren't even close to Jaden Daniels' range are doing an interview with him. So now you got to really wonder if the Falcons are just skipping the Jaden Daniels interview because they already know who their quarterback is going to be, and it is Justin Fields. So just some loose rumors and connecting the dots going on with this one. But let's get into our combine interviews that Atlanta has conducted so far, and we start with a pair of edge rushers. Dallas Turner and Laiatu Latu, two of the top edge rushers in this draft class. You could argue they are number one and number two. And you could definitely make a good argument that the Falcons should use their 8th overall pick on one of these two guys. Dallas Turner and Laiatu Latu, they come into the draft, like I said, as two of the top prospects at the position. Turner was Alabama's number one edge rusher. The Alabama Crimson Tide website said he had 11 sacks. And as for Latu, he had 13 sacks for the Bruins. Now, Latu is definitely an interesting prospect because he medically retired to begin or midway through his career at Washington, and then he transferred down to UCLA, and he had a complete resurgence of his career. But I want to share with you guys what I think the best NFL draft expert, Dane Brugler, had to say on both of these players. He said on Dallas Turner, as a pass rusher, Turner is quick off the ball to get underneath blocks or bury his hands into the chest of blockers and convert speed to power. Despite lacking ideal bulk, he plays physically at the point of attack and is a strong run defender, aside from some missed tackles that need to be cleaned up, with an elite competitive motor. He's 6'4", 242 pounds, so that's where the slight undersize comes in. I do think he could benefit maybe a little bit more in a 3-4 defense, similar, what Atlanta runs, where he can be an outside linebacker and not be a true put your hand in the dirt defensive end every single play. But the production was there. Now, what's interesting about Turner was he was opposite Will Anderson for a while in Tuscaloosa, so that led to a lot of attraction going to Will Anderson, and we only saw really one true season of Dallas Turner being the number one edge rusher. And usually if you're going to be the first edge rusher taken, you're not the quote-unquote starter. I mean, he started more than just 1 year, but I mean like the number one guy. He was only that for one season. And so we might see him go a little bit earlier than I think he could go in other draft classes, but I don't think this edge rusher draft class is all that great. And that could be a reason why Turner moves a little bit up the draft board. Now, as for Mr. Latu, here's what Dane Brugler had to say on him. For pass rushers, there is a saying, beat the hands, beat the man. Latu lives by this principle with the cohesive way he weaponizes his hands and feet to defeat blocks. FBS best 24.6% pass rush win percentage in 2023. As a run defender, his lack of ideal length and pop will show at times, but he made significant improvements as a senior with his read/react in this area. Now, Latu is 6'4", 261 pounds. He was very productive for the Bruins last season. Like I mentioned earlier, he led the Pac-12 in sacks along with TFLs. He was a one-man wrecking crew on what was a pretty average UCLA defense. Yeah, that's selling a bit short. But the point is, both of these edge rushers are going to be good NFL players. I don't love either of them at number 8. If the Falcons were picking at 14 or 15, all right, I can get behind it. But when you're picking top 10, I'm not looking for guys I like. I'm looking for guys I love. I'm looking for guys that I know are going to be surefire things. Because picking top 10 is not a badge of honor. It's a pretty sad reflection of the previous year. And you better nail that 8th overall pick so you're not picking top 10 again. And unfortunately for Atlanta, they have now fallen into a trap of picking top 10. And they haven't had bad picks necessarily, don't get me wrong, but they really got to nail this one to get out of that 7-win range. And so for Atlanta, I want to find a guy I love. And I just don't love either of those players. Now, let me know what you think. Should the Falcons go edge at number 8? Don't get me wrong. I fully believe that the Falcons need to get a very good edge rusher in the draft or free agency. But I'm not going to pick an edge rusher at 8 just for the sake of taking an edge rusher because Atlanta needs one. I want to go get the best player available. And that might not be an edge rusher. That could be a cornerback. That could be a wide receiver. But I don't want to look back at this draft in a couple of years and go, can't believe Atlanta picked that random edge when Terrion Arnold or Roma Dunze or Malik Neighbors was available at 8. All guys I am higher on than those 2 edge rushers. Moving on to the next interview at the Combine, Texas defensive tackle Byron Murphy. Some think the best defensive tackle in this draft class, which makes you wonder, why are the Atlanta Falcons looking defensive tackle, right? Well, let's first start with Byron Murphy's resume because it was very impressive last season in Austin. 8.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. He's a very good run stopper, but he's also got an elite motor to bring some pass rush upside as well. And we know in this day and age, teams are not always looking for nose tackle, tree stump defensive tackles. They want to find guys that can get into the backfield and bring some pass rush upside as well. Here's what Dane Brugler had to say on Byron Murphy. In his first season as a full-time starter for the Longhorns, Murphy had a team-best 45 pressures and ranked number 1 among all FBS interior defensive linemen in pass rush win percentage, 19.6%. He fires off the ball to get vertical push through gaps or establish low man positioning, which helps him shed blocks or anchor the point of attack. He can get swallowed up at times, but Murphy's effort and hand usage make his lack of size less of a concern than expected. Like I said a moment ago, my reaction to this was, the Falcons are looking for a new DT? Like, that's an overreaction. These are combine interviews. They're not drafting the guy right now. They're just doing some homework. They're sitting down for 15, 20 minutes trying to get to know the player. But my suspicion is they came into the combine doing a lot of homework already, identified a couple of guys they want to get to know on a personal level, since you can't do that while watching film, and clearly they have some level of interest in going defensive tackle, or at least just in Byron Murphy's case, because maybe they think he is a very special player. But when you look at Atlanta's defensive line, I don't think they view Byron Murphy as a defensive end in a 3-4 front. He seems to be more of a Grady Jarrett 3 to 2 technique and maybe shade a little bit more on the inside. But you've got David Onyemata, you've got Grady Jarrett, 2 very high caliber players under contract, not just for this year, but for next year as well. So now I really start thinking down the road, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself a little bit, but just bear with me. Maybe the Falcons are planning a couple steps ahead. Like, you look at the cap hits in 2025, and I know 2024, one offseason at a time, but teams do draft not just for the upcoming season, but for a couple of seasons down the road, so that if they decide to move on from a player at a starting role, they've got someone already in the farm system ready to step up and take over that starting spot. And Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata both have big cap hits in 2025. So maybe Atlanta is thinking a little bit down the road with this pre-draft meeting with Byron Murphy. Probably, reading a little bit too much into it, but it does make you wonder. Now, before we get on to the other combine visits, I do want to let you guys know that we have live shows here on the channel every single Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And you can actually see some of the names at the bottom of the screen that have been circulating throughout the video that sponsored and support our channel with generous donations during our live show. So make sure you tune in Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern so you can see how the sausage is made and to witness a live edition of Falcons Today. All right, let's move on to our fourth and fifth and final combine interviews so far. We've got another pair of edge rushers. Chop Robinson out of Penn State. We've talked about him before. And then Marshawn Kneeland from Western Michigan. So a MAC player sneaking up into the combine visits. Good for him. But Chop Robinson and Marshawn Kneeland, you can look at their stats. They weren't uber productive last year. These are your traits guys, right? These are players that have a rare combination of size, speed, and strength, the bend, some level of those four tangible things you look for in an NFL edge rusher. And they've got three of them. They've got two of them. They got all four of them. Some combination of that. But I don't think either of these guys are going to go at number 8. They probably won't even go round 1, but you never know. They could sneak into round 1. I think these are visits or meetings for round 2 in case Atlanta decides to go wide receiver or cornerback with the 8th overall pick and address edge rusher with their 43rd overall pick unless they decide to trade that for Justin Fields. But let's just say these are targets for day 2 of the draft. Well, I love my history. So I looked back at the history of the NFL draft from 2016 to 2020, a 5-year sample size. And I also think it's far enough back where we can deem whether the pick was a success or not. Whereas Arnold Ebiketie, it's only been 2 years. I think it's probably a little bit too early still to say if it was a good or bad pick. But in this 5-year span, 13 defensive end edge rushers were taken in round 2. Of those 13, there were only 3 seasons where guys had 8+ sacks. None of them had 10 or more sacks. None of them made a Pro Bowl. And only one of the 13 even got a second contract from the team that drafted them. So the point is, it's very difficult to find talent in the NFL draft. It is a crapshoot. It is a lottery. But some positions are much more difficult to identify. And I think edge rusher is one of them. You can find some very accomplished wide receivers in round 2. Devontae Adams, DK Metcalf, 2 guys that come to mind that were round 2 picks. Edge rushers, the last successful round 2 edge rusher, I would say was Preston Smith by the Washington Redskins at the time. Like, it's not easy to find round 2 edge rushers, which I know that goes against what I said at the beginning of the video, which is, well, if you're not going to find a good edge rusher in round 2, you got to use that 8th overall pick on one. But then I have an internal conflict because I don't want to see that 8th overall pick just be blindly used on an edge rusher just for the sake of taking an edge rusher. I want to see them get the best player. And if they think that's an edge rusher, okay. But if they think, and I think, a guy like Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors is way ahead of a Dallas Turner or a Laiatu Latu, then let's go with the best player available. And we'll find a solution for long-term edge rusher homegrown talent later on at some point. All right, that will do it for us on today's show. Shout out to Mr. Barrett Gay. We got Complete the States from across the pond, Established TV as well, and then Marlon Kusi for sponsoring this edition of Falcons Today. Really appreciate all the love and support you guys have shown us over on our live shows. So we will see you on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Have a good rest of your night, and we'll catch up later.